So my name is Jodie. I think many of you have met me either through class or through consultations at the Bren Clinic. I'm the director of the Bren Clinic. Also with us tonight is Nikki Krebsbach. Did I say that correctly? I'm always afraid I'm going to slaughter your last name. So Nikki, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am a practicing lawyer in Visalia, California. I started out in civil law, moved to family law, and finally found the right fit in special education law.
And we're glad you found that fit. Thank you. And she does represent families and students, parents, you don't represent school districts, do you?
Never.
Okay.
Never.
Just checking. And Shannon, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Shannon Wentworth. I recently graduated from law school and passed the bar, so I'm just waiting for the bar to finish my background check, and then I will also be a lawyer. I took Jodie's class this past August, the last fall semester, and I'm also the mom to a 7-year-old son with special needs, so this is particularly pertinent to me.
All right, so I want to thank both of you for chiming in with us tonight. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So everything we're talking about tonight is based on the guidance that was offered to us by the Department of Education. I believe it was March 12th. If you don't already have this document, I put the website up here. You probably can't cut and paste it from the screen share, but I'll leave it up for a little while so you can type it in if you need to. This would take you to a website where you can download it if you'd like to follow along, but I will also be showing the language of the document in our screen share here. So just to start off, I want to point out how this is the Department of Education's kind of in their introduction to this document. They point out, if you look at this highlighted portion, it's a series of question and answers. So there's maybe about a dozen or so questions with short answers. And they're explaining here that this document doesn't impose any additional requirements beyond those that are already part of the laws that apply to special education, and that their responses document generally constitute informational guidance. So this is just guidance. It is not statutory or regulatory law or requirements. It doesn't replace existing law. It's just meant to kind of provide guidance in this very uncertain time that we're all facing. So none of this is binding necessarily. And in the same vein, this is our disclaimer for tonight. What you're getting tonight are three people with legal backgrounds who have read this guidance, and we're going to give you our opinion and our take on it. So none of this should be construed as absolute law or legal advice. It's really just our attempt to try and help you make sense of this document and give you our thoughts on it. Shannon and Nikki, do you have anything to add before we jump in?
Nope.
No.
Okay. All right, so those of you who have joined us a little bit later, I have everybody on mute right now except for the three presenters. If you have questions along the way, you can type them in the chat. I can't promise we'll get to them, but we will try. And if we have extra time at the end, we can unmute if we have additional questions or if you want to do some chatting. But we're going to go ahead. Now we've done our disclaimers, so we're going to jump in. The very first part of this, and Shannon and Nikki, please just chime in and talk over me whenever you have something to share. This was not rehearsed or anything for those of you joining us. We're just here to share our opinions. So the very beginning talks about how none of the existing laws, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, or even Title II of ADA, none of them specifically address the situation that we have found ourselves in, right? None of these laws anticipated that schools would be closed for more than 10 consecutive days when it wasn't some sort of a holiday or in between the school years. And so we are in uncharted, unprecedented waters. So we have very little information on how schools should be responding to continuing the education of children during these closures. And that is why the Department of Education issued this question and answer series. which doesn't provide a whole lot of guidance. I'm sure many of you have read it already. So jumping right in then to the first answer. Let's read the first question though. Is the LEA required to continue to provide FAPE to students with disabilities during a school closure caused by COVID-19? So, and that is where I'm anticipating everybody's found themselves. Chat, answer in the chat if for some reason you're somewhere where a school district hasn't closed. If your school district is closed, then don't say anything in the chat. So that way we'll know if there's anybody here who has a school district that is not closed, but I'm anticipating we all probably do. So one of the first things I want to point out are these blue circles here. So we're not exactly sure what they mean by educational services. That could mean, it could mean a lot of different things, I think. And Nikki and Shannon, what do you guys think? As far as we could be where teachers are giving direction over the internet, where they're sending packets home, all of those could be called educational services, don't you think?
I do. Yeah. I think it's very vague, but I think it's vague in our favor, actually. Any educational services, that's a pretty broad category.
Would maybe you think even just a link to an online thing they use at school, would that be perhaps even educational service? Maybe it would depend on what's in the link.
So I would think so, yes. I would think, I mean, it's not, again, this is just interpretation of the Department of Education, but you know, any educational service, like I said, that's pretty darn broad. Visalia Unified School District, where 2 of my children go to school, they did something clever. None of my clients on IEPs are receiving any services right now. However, the school district has reached out to my children who are not on IEPs, and they have said, we're going to prepare 15 days of educational material for you. And I thought, awesome, there it is. That means my special
services.
Right. However, here's what they did. They said 15 days of material for you, but it's all going to be just a review the previous 2 weeks up until the date of closure. So in that respect, I think the argument could be, yes, that's an educational service, but it's not a service going forward for ongoing instruction that I think would then trigger
possibly
the rights of a special education student.
Yeah.
So today, my son's elementary school had us go pick up packets. And they didn't say they were review packets, but they made these packets available to us, which he's in general education, but he still has an IEP. So, so I think that would count as educational services because it's not review here in Clovis Unified. And additionally, I had gotten his speech language therapist reached out to me today via email to ask if he had access to iPad, computer, cell phone in order to do something. Yeah, but that was the extent of the communication was just to assess what he actually had available to him.
So that's one thing we have to think about is what do they mean by educational services? And then the next component here with another blue circle is who they're sending those services to, which would be the general student population. And I know, Nikki, you mentioned something you thought about that. Do you want to share that the other day with me?
Remind me.
Where you talked about maybe what if they just provide something for like their GATE or their AP classes?
Oh, right, exactly. So again, this guidance or this interpretation is so vague. You know, the general student population. I mean, I don't see general student population in IDE anywhere. Do you guys? I mean, I'm not even sure that's the correct nomenclature.
No, I've never heard that terminology myself.
Right, exactly. So what I shared with Jodie and Shannon yesterday is, again, my 2 students that go to Visalia Unified School District, this was prior to the announcement yesterday that they were going to give out 15 days of review or, you know, previously provided instruction. The message was, hey, we're going to give out special materials to the AP students, the students that are in the AP classes. And to me, I don't know how, I don't see them being able to draw the line between, you know, just the AP students, but not students on special ed. To me, general student population is so vague that even if you hand it out to, you know, just that small subset of AP students, to me, that triggers the obligation that we're going to read about in the next sentence.
Yeah. So again, for those of you listening in, we're talking about this just so you know that these are things that we think about when we're looking at how we can help you get some services for your kiddos. What does that really mean? So here this is saying if your school doesn't provide any educational services. So those, what does educational services mean? We talked about that, but who do they have to provide it to? To the general student population. So whether that means everybody, whether that means some sort of a subset, certain classes, what if only some teachers send something home but others don't? Does that still consider the general student population? We're speculating here. We don't know for sure. But obviously, because we advocate for families with individuals with disabilities, we look at it and think, well, if they send any services to any student that doesn't have an IEP, well, then that automatically could trigger it. And that would be a very low bar, but that might actually be how it's construed. It might be construed at a much higher level. We're not sure. But let's move on. So if they don't provide any educational services to the general population, then they're not required to provide services for students with disabilities during this closure. So that seems pretty self-explanatory, right? If no other students get any services from the school district during the closure, then neither do our kiddos with disabilities. But even if that happens, once the school resumes, whenever that ends up being, your district has to make every effort to provide according to the IEP. So whatever was talked about in the IEP, the goals and the services, now once school's back in session, they have to make every effort to comply with what's in the IEP or the 504 plan. But then they add this sentence of, we understand that there may be exceptional circumstances. So think about when we all come back. There's going to be lots of people wanting evaluations to see how far behind their child may have fell during the closure. There's going to be lots of parents saying, you need to give my son or my daughter more speech because they missed out. There's what I'm trying to point out is the school district is going to be so, they're going to have so many demands placed on them that it may create an exceptional circumstance where they're not able to give every child everything that was in their IEP, right? We're going to have to get our wheels up and turning again, and it may take a little while. Do you have any thoughts on that, Shannon and Nikki, to add?
Well, I think it gives them a really good out if they don't do anything, and that is where you know, what we were talking about yesterday is just the relationships with your IEP team become really, really important, because if you have good relationships with them, you can be asking for things that maybe they aren't required to give, and you know, continuing your kid's progress, or at least not losing, you know, what your kid has already gained during the shutdown.
Yeah. And you, just so you guys know, the three of us did meet briefly yesterday to talk about our take on some of these things. And we actually came up with some things that in a little while we're going to show you that are things you can do right now to try and help mitigate some of that regression, or set yourself up so that you have maybe a stronger case, for lack of better phrasing, to ask for these compensatory services, which is what's mentioned here at the end. So these last couple of orange boxes, even after we come back, it would be made on an individualized case-by-case basis whether or not compensatory services are needed. And I'm not going to talk about that a whole lot right now, because we're going to talk about it a little bit later. But just so you know, nobody knows right now what is the standard for determining compensatory services in this situation. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about how the law looks at compensatory services in light of extended school year. But we're going to put kind of a pin on that discussion as we move forward, and we will come back to that. So to just paraphrase, this screen paraphrases what that last paragraph said. If they're not going to provide special education services to the general student population, then they're not required to provide special education services. But when school resumes, they have to make every effort to comply with the IEP, the 504 plan, all in light of FAPE. And they would have to make individual determinations of whether compensatory services are warranted or are appropriate, I guess would be the better word. Now we move on to the other paragraph, which is the one that I'm guessing most of our school districts are going to fall in. because I think a lot of them are going to try and find a way to continue to provide educational opportunities. So one thing I wanted to point out, and Nikki and Shannon, tell me what you guys think here. Here it says educational opportunities, and I may be splitting hairs, but if we go back to the other paragraph, it says educational services. I just noticed that. What do you think about the difference in phrasing? Educational services versus opportunities.
So that's a really good catch, Jodie. Because to me, those two paragraphs, it just seems like it reiterates the opposite proposition, right? And so you pointing out educational services versus educational opportunities, the thing that's coming to mind for me right now is the nutrition, the food, and the meals that these districts are providing to these students. I mean, it's almost a bigger push down here in the South Valley. Nutrition seems to be more of a higher importance to the districts than even instruction and academics, and it is very important. But to me, educational services may not include food, but educational opportunities, sure does, because there are a number of students that, they eat only when they're at school, and that's unfortunate. But if you are providing educational opportunities, and within that you believe that includes nutrition and food, because IDEA broadly defines, those supports and services that go along with the education, then that would be a stronger argument in favor of our kiddos.
Well, I think you could even argue when you said that that your schools gave your students packets of past work to review, that might even be an educational opportunity where it might not be seen as an educational service.
Yep, an opportunity to reiterate or to further impose that understanding.
Yeah. So again,
to me, an opportunity really sounds like it's not a requirement for the students to do this work, but they have an opportunity to continue their education, perhaps, versus an obligation to, which may mean, for instance, if we don't go back to school this year, like, does my child go to second grade? Or are they grade level advancing? If are they going to test him before to see if he took advantage of these educational opportunities, versus services? Like,
good point. Yeah.
Like, maybe these aren't requirements, like that he, the packet is a suggestion. Not.
I think that's a valid interpretation. Makes sense to me. So I did get a private message from one of the participants here that explained that 3 of their daughter's teachers were sending lessons plans. They're from Clovis Unified. So they were getting lesson plans for the next week in math, science, and electives. So there are some families getting actual school packet of work sent home for some of their gen ed students. So that, I think what we're discussing here is that educational opportunities seems like a lower bar than educational services. And here this paragraph says, if the school continues to provide some of these educational opportunities, again, it's to the general student population, which we're taking to mean students that don't have IEPs or 504s, then the school has to ensure that students with disabilities also have equal access to the same opportunities. Now, if we were to end the sentence right there, basically that means if our gen ed students are getting packets, then our special ed students need to get packets. If our gen ed students are getting a lesson for their teacher from their teacher via the internet or Skype or something like that, then our students would have to as well. But they don't end it there. They say it's equal access to the same opportunities, but that also has to be provided in light of FAPE, including the provision of FAPE. So if you have a student like my son who would not pay attention at all to his teacher on a computer screen, he would check out, unless his teacher magically turned into Cookie Monster, he would not be paying attention to her at all. So equal access to those same opportunities would be meaningless for him. So, but once we throw in this provision of FAPE, now we have to find something that's somewhat equal access to those same opportunities, but a little bit more tailored to his needs. Is that how you read this, Nikki and Shannon?
Yeah, to me, that's the golden nugget right there in that sentence. It's already been, presumably it's already been determined what FAPE is for each child, assuming we have a consented to IEP. So to me, that doesn't say, including some modified provision of FAPE that works with the current circumstances and the, strained resources of the district. That says the provision of FAPE. And so to me, that means the child's IEP has to be, you know, appropriately followed, like as it is when schools are not closed.
Yeah. And it goes on. Oops, sorry, I went too far. There we go. And then it says, to the greatest extent possible, they need to provide it in conformity basically with the student's IEP or 504 plan. So I shortened and paraphrased a little bit, but that's what I take that next sentence to mean. That yes, if we're providing gen ed students with these opportunities, we need to provide equal access in light of FAPE, but we also have to be doing it to the greatest extent possible to align with their IEP and 504 plan. And again, Nikki and Shannon, what are your take on that sentence?
Jodie, do you think that second part, to the greatest extent possible, kind of lessens the requirement of including the provision of FAPE?
I do, in a way, because if you think about what's going on right now, to the greatest extent possible, it's probably not going to be possible for my son's speech therapist to come and work with him, but that's really the only way he's going to pay attention is if she's there with him, right? So maybe, yeah, to the greatest extent possible, and in light of FAPE, they may contradict each other or lessen. Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, I mean, I think it completely, it almost removes the requirement at all, since we're in a national emergency situation. To the greatest extent possible, we're not supposed to be in contact with each other, therefore it's not possible. I mean, it's a pretty easy out. I think
it lets the district off the hook.
Yeah,
I think it does, but I also think it doesn't completely, right? It lessens maybe the strength of that hook, so to speak. But I think for those of us who are able to step in and be, say, the aide, right? Quite often the aides provide the service directly and the teacher is supposed to oversee it. And in a way, if the teacher is able to, say, chime in, maybe we get the speech therapist to do a half an hour a week or something, but we have to be the person who, after we listen to the speech therapist on the internet, now we go and deliver the service to our child under their direction and supervision, much like the aide would. So yes, it makes us as parents have to do more work, but I think even for our gen ed students, parents are going to have to step in and play that role anyway, right? They may send packets home, they may be able to do some virtual classes online, but parents are going to have to be the heavy hand to step in and make sure the students are doing what our teachers would normally do, right? So that I don't think it completely lets them off the hook, but it also means we as parents have to be willing and able to step in and be that aid and the direct provider of the service.
Yeah, I know several BCBAs in the Bay Area, and they are doing lesson plans and training videos for the parents of their kids who are homebound because they've been on shelter in place now for over a week.
Yeah.
And you know, it is a way to keep the progress going forward. I know some parents may feel a little overwhelmed by the idea of suddenly learning how to become a speech therapist or a behavioral therapist.
Yeah.
But that is, you know, one way to deliver these services now is, you know, to watch a video and, you know, get access to the materials that your child would normally be using and do it yourself, you know, to the best of your ability.
I think, Shannon, you made a great statement there that, like, say your student has an AAC device, we already know that there's a law in place that they should be able to have that device at home. But if for some reason they don't have that device or something that they use in the classroom that helps them communicate or access some of these services or their goals, those are things we should be able to. I think if we're going to be expected to step in and provide some of these services, we should have those. So that may mean talking with our teachers, and we'll get to this in just a little while too, to get some of the supplies that they use to help our students work towards their goals.
Yeah.
Be that devices or books or, you know, even PEX pictures or something, whatever it is.
Yeah, I that's one of the things I reached out to my son's school to ask for the books that he's on, because there's a specific reading program that they do, and he has to get to a certain level to get to second grade, and I don't have those books, you know, and I want to make sure that he's tracking, so when he goes back and tests for reading, he's ready to go to second grade.
Yeah, and I do think in light of FAPE, it's more important, well, at least for me as a mom, I've got my 2 kids, right? My daughter, she could jump to a new book if she has to, and she may miss a couple of steps, but she'll start to pick it up. With my son, that continuity in the types of things he's learning has to be there. If we just switch to a totally different book, we would be starting from square one, and that's taking in light of fate. But that also, I think, that's possible to the greatest extent possible. It's possible for us to go to the school. My daughter already went and picked up her trombone that she, checks out of the school for the whole break. So why can't my son go in and check out some of his special education supplies? So I did notice somebody made a text message or a chat that they've never been a fan of teletherapy, and I agree. I haven't been either. But and then she also said that, but given our current situation, that may be our best option. And it truly may be, which kind of leads us to the next point. So again, this was just was somebody have something to add?
Yeah, can I jump in for just a quick second? One of the things that my BCBA friend said today was that the guidelines for what people, because I'm seeing this question about compensation, they're broadening the definition of things that people can be compensated for. So telephonic communications and stuff like that, the therapists are going to be able to be compensated for those things as they normally would be.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And this here again, it's just my attempt to kind of summarize the two paragraphs and compare them. So if they do continue to provide our gen ed students with educational opportunities, then they must ensure students with disabilities also have equal access to the same types of opportunities, but we also have to include this provision of FAPE and to the greatest extent possible deliver what's in their IEP or their 504. So now with all of that in mind, and I do recognize we're only on the first question in that packet. However, that seems to be the one that is the most applicable. So I do think we are spending most of our time on that. With that in mind, I was going to, let me go back here where we talked about compensatory services. If we're thinking that maybe our children, after all of this is said and done, may be in need of compensatory services, the only way I could think of to look at that, from what I've studied, is to look at how we determine whether or not a child gets extended school year services. Because the purpose behind ESY is to get ahead of that regression, to say, look, so that we don't have to provide compensatory services after the fact, we're going to get in front of this regression that will happen over the school year, and we're going to continue to offer certain services so that they don't regress as much. And then they don't have to take as much time when the new school year starts trying to get back into it, right? Making up for all of that lost time. So it's not necessarily anything that was in this document, but it's something I think that it's at least worth thinking about if you're hoping to if you watch your child regress and then in the hope of maybe getting some of this compensatory services, I don't know how else to look at the way they're going to analyze that. So before we look into the criteria for ESY, I want to make sure everybody understands the purpose. It's considered a strategy for minimizing the regression of skill and then shortening the time needed to gain back that same level of skill that existed at the end of the school year. So it's not meant to give them this great opportunity to get ahead. It's really just to maintain or to minimize regression. It's designed to maintain student mastery. Like I said, it's a maintenance thing of these critical skills. And that's a key in a lot of the case law. The key becomes, is it a critical skill? Because if it's not a critical skill, then we don't have to provide extended school year for it, school year services. And they may end up looking at this in the same way. If it's not a critical skill, then maybe we don't have to worry about these compensatory services. But I am guessing here, very much, this is just a big guess. It is based on multi-criteria, which I'll review some of those in just a minute, not solely on regression, although regression tends to be the big overarching concern in almost every case that I've read on ESY. And deliverable in a variety of environments and structures. So if you look here, it even says home with the parent teaching. So that's a possible provision of ESY that could also be a possible provision during this closure as well. We act as the teachers and we get consultations from the school, obviously would be over the, virtual consultations. Anything to add about the ESY before we jump into the standards, Nikki or Shannon?
Not specifically as to ESY. Your A through D subsections down here is super interesting to me. That actually is a way that a district would consider delivering ESY, knowing that that's a potential kind of delivery of services now during the closures. I would just add that not one district that any of my clients are a part of right now has reached out to those clients to try to deliver any educational opportunities to any of the students right now. So when I read this interpretation by the Department of Education, it seems pretty clear that we need to be doing something, whether it's the full IEP, that's a tough argument to make, or some sort of, the greatest extent possible instruction or opportunity to these special education students. Not one of them has been contacted for that. And I would say probably 90% of the districts that I represent children in are doing some sort of delivery of educational opportunity / services. And I don't think that I haven't made those requests or demands yet, but they're not getting in front of it. The district is not concerned at this time to kind of meet that requirement.
Yeah,
especially knowing
if
now.
Anybody who's listening, if you have received some sort of a contact from your district in regards to your special education child and their services during the closure, type a quick message in the chat so we can see if anybody has, because I'm in the same boat as you, Nikki. I haven't heard of any school districts reaching out to parents about continuing their child's special education services.
In fact, what I'm hearing is, don't call us. We'll call you when we come up for air. We'll let you know when we're ready to talk to you again. And that's why your, subsection A, home with the parent teaching, that's just a matter of collaboration. That is a simple email, texting, something with the director of special ed or a case manager and the parent. And there's an argument that the district could be, meeting that obligation even with just that sort of delivery, but nothing.
So if those of you who are, you're reading the chat, I know Anastasia and Jennifer both made a comment that they've talked to some, or they've heard administrators talking about the fact that it's not even in their discussions yet, or that they're only worried about IEP meetings. So Chelsea has gotten a call from her daughter's teacher. So there might be some things happening, but then other times where it seems like nothing's happening.
Yeah, so like I said, I did get the speech language pathologist at Weldon Elementary did call me, and to try to assess what we have in order for telelearning. But I don't know if that's something that the district has decided to do, or if that's something she's doing on her own
individually by the teacher. Yeah.
I have a question for Christine, who says her special ed child will be receiving a packet of work. Christine, is that the same packet that all the other children in the general population are getting, or is it individualized for your child? And maybe just throw that answer up there, but go ahead and go on, Jodie.
All right, here comes my kid. I'm going to mute you guys.
I locked my door and told my husband he had to watch the kids. Okay, so here I was going to look at the standards for regression, or excuse me, the standards for determining if the child qualifies for ESY. So the first one, and obviously the one that is usually heaviest weighed, is regression and recoupment. So regression is actually talking about a decline in knowledge or skill from the, see my little mouse, it's so touchy. I'm sorry about that. And then recoupment is the amount of time that it takes to regain that functioning, that skill. So the issue is whether the benefit deprived the child during the regular school year, will that deprivation significantly jeopardize their educational program? So that's what we're looking at when we're determining, does a child qualify for ESY? How much will they regress, and how long will it take to gain that skill or understanding back? Another thing we look at is, was it an emerging skill? Were they right at the end of the school year, were they at a point where they're about ready to make some sort of a big breakthrough? Because if they're right on the cusp of something like that, then we are more likely to continue in ESY, because we don't want to lose that traction that we've gained. So that's something else that we might take into consideration. And this may, like I said, we're guessing here, but this may transfer over to when you're trying to seek compensatory services for the regression your child faced during these closures. They also take into account the nature and severity of the child's disability. So although they can't say just because you're this category, you don't get ESY, they can't make blanket statements like that, but definitely those that are more severely impacted or have a more severe disability have a higher likelihood of qualifying for ESY. And another factor, which I think is especially applicable right now, is the ability of parents to provide an educational structure at home. So if parents are able to provide that, then they're going to give less weight to the regression and recoupment issue, because we as parents could have stepped in and helped mitigate some of this regression, right? So those are the main. There are a few others, but those are the main ones that I felt were worth mentioning tonight about how we determine if they're eligible for ESY, that may be useful if we're seeking compensatory educations after the closure. Anything to add, Shannon and Nikki?
No.
Okay, so our next thing is, I just want to make sure we understand, the law has said that the determination of ESY eligibility must be based on empirical and qualitative data. So it's really hard for us to have some of that empirical and qualitative data. Unless for some reason your child had just finished a round of assessments right before the closure and you can get them to do assessments right after the closure, chances are we don't have empirical qualitative data to actually base these decisions on.
So that was one of the things that we were talking about, because of like Theron's ABA therapy, I've been able, like I've learned how to collect data the way that they collect data, but maybe that's one of the conversations you have with the IEP team is what data are you collecting on my kids, so that when you come back for that meeting, you're able to help them assess where your son is. Obviously, you know, we're not trained data takers, we're parents, but if, you know, as much information, you know, a log of what your child's been able to do during this shutdown, you know, just, I think it could be helpful in getting back up to speed faster once we get back.
Yeah, I mean, because if we think about it here on this slide where it said, you know, of one of the environments for even ESY could be home with parent teaching and staff consulting. With that in mind, if we're keeping data, then we may be able to say, okay, I don't have the exact data that you keep, but I can show you what we've been working on and how we've kept that data. And you know, Shannon mentioned things we can ask the teachers. So I'm going to come back to this one. These next couple of slides, I think, are, if anything in this discussion empowers you in any way, it's probably these next couple of slides. I wish I could say that you're going to walk away from this feeling like, oh, everything will be okay. And I can't, because we can't tell you everything will be okay. But these next couple of slides at least give you some power. What's that?
I said, wash your hands.
Yes, a lot. But these next couple of slides at least give you an idea of something you can do to try and help. So obviously, touchy mouse, excuse me. We want to minimize our child's regression, right? We don't want to sit back, let our child fail just so that we can stick it to the school district, or if that's how you want to phrase it, and say, now you have to give me compensatory services, right? It would be better if our child never regressed in the first place. So that's our first goal, is to minimize the amount of regression that our children will face. I think it would be very difficult, even in our gen ed students, to completely say nobody's going to regress, but we want to minimize that. So ways to do that are talk to your teacher, your child's teacher, soon. Talk to them before they forget what your child was doing right before the closure. Ask them how the IEP goals are being worked on. Was it done in a group or an individual setting? Was it delivered by the teacher or some sort of a para or aide? I think this is one of your most important ones. How did they actually measure whether your child was making progress on the goal? Was it done in a pull out or push in method? All of these things, just to give you an idea of how were they actually addressing that goal. And then you also want to know, what was your child's progress? What, at the time of closure, what did that progress look like? You want to get as specific information from them as possible, asking them to break it down into maybe sub-skill sets. Because think about one of those ESY criteria was, were they on the cusp of a breakthrough? You'll want to know that. Was there some part of this that they were close to learning. Maybe they weren't close to mastering the whole goal, but maybe there was some individual subset skill that they were very close to mastering. You're going to want to know that, because if they fall behind and they're not even close to mastering it anymore, that's a very clear sign now of regression. But if we only rely on the progress reports that were sent home, it will probably not tell us that, right? Our progress reports usually say things like they are 50% towards reaching the goal. It doesn't actually break it down all the time into sub skills. So that's what I think would be especially helpful for both reasons. For you to help minimize your child's regression and help them stay as close as they can to being on the cusp, and maybe even better yet, breaking through and actually mastering that skill. Or if you're unable to do that, it can help maybe later on if you are trying to put together some sort of a plea to your IEP team for compensatory services. Anything to add?
Like if you can say my kid was just about to master, tying a shoe or toilet training, and now we're back here. Like, it's just the more concrete you can be, I think the better your compensatory services are going to be.
Yeah, or your stronger case for it. Yeah.
You've got to get that data however you can, because they can't say no in the face of data, right? Because, that's what they hang their hat on when they make decisions for your child, is the data that they collect. And so, if you don't have the data, it's really easy for them to say, no, we disagree with you. And that's the gray area, that IDEA is built on. But,
and if there was ever a time for us as parents to have the rights, I guess, to access that data, it's if we are now stepping into the role of the aide or the teacher and providing the service. We should have the data that shows what they've been working on and how the student has been doing up until this point. And that's why I say here, I put soon. Talk to your teacher soon. Don't wait. Do it now while it's fresh in their minds about how your child was. They've already forgotten a little bit because it's been a week almost, right? So talk to them soon, however soon you can, to find out all of these details. And the next slide are some questions. This is from the talk team, actually. I was talking with Amy and Amber this morning, and they helped me think of some questions that they thought might be especially helpful. If you're not familiar with the talk team, it's a speech language and an ABA provider here in town. And these are things that you had to sign in with an email address. So I'll be more than happy to email these PowerPoint slides or whatever to you, everybody who signed in. So hopefully you signed in with an email that you actually use. But what materials were you using with my child, and can I have them, right? Can I actually get a version of them, or the actual one if that's the only one you have? When were they most successful? Was there a certain time of day that it was best to work on it, or a certain environment? What was the hardest part about this particular goal? Where were they most successful? Where did they need the most support? So what part of this goal was easier for them, or were they making the most progress on? And what part were they falling behind in or still having a hard time catching on to? What kind of supports, prompting, or scaffolding were you using to help them be successful? Was there anybody else that was working on these goals? Did you have any unwritten goals that you were addressing? Something that may not have been in the IEP, but was just something that they were working on with the whole class, maybe. Were there session notes being kept? And if there were, ask for a copy of them. Were there events or situations that they noticed were triggers for interfering behaviors? So these are all things, these were just brainstorming questions that we came up with to try and help you know what to talk to your teachers about, your students' teachers. Anything to add there? I am going to go back a couple slides just to make sure, and I think I've said a lot of this already, but just to make sure, if we're looking at the ESY criteria as maybe transferring over, and again, for those of you listening in, this is still just us speculating that there might be a similar criteria in place for compensatory services after the break. It's not going to, I think it'll fall in line with ESY in these ways. It won't be, well, we didn't maximize their educational opportunity during the break. I don't think anybody's going to be able to use the word, we didn't maximize their education and have any kind of a claim, a viable claim. It's not necessary to continue instruction on all of their goals. Remember, I talked about critical skills. Here we're for ESY, and I imagine for this as well, one of the things we're going to look at is, was this a critical skill that led to regression? If it's not, then I'm not sure compensatory services will even be entertained.
That would be under the ESY analysis though, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And that's also,
ESY.
what are they defining as critical skills as well?
Great question.
Jodie, do you have a good sense of that?
Usually,
because it's like,
the case law usually falls down, it's an individual basis. So there's no, I'm not aware of any law that actually defines what those critical skills are. They just look at each child, how they're affected by their disability, and you kind of figure out as a team what the critical skills for that student are.
right. I just feel like the bar is really low on that, if I'm remembering correctly from class. It's just like, oh, the child is still breathing, so they're mastering that critical skill. Let's pat ourselves on the back.
Yeah. Well, yeah, again, because you're balancing this. Us as parents, of course, we want to maximize educational opportunities, and they're going to say, well, that's you trying to do that, but it really isn't a critical skill. I mean, those are your two flip sides, right? You've got maximum educational opportunity, and the other side saying, no, this is a critical skill. And we have to create our individual cases about why it's critical for that specific child, why it will lead to regression in a critical area. Okay. So I do believe that was most of our discussion, at least for the first question. I did throw our disclaimer in here again in case anybody missed it. None of this was, or what we talk about from here on out is legal advice, right? This is just our opinions on this document released by the Department of Education. I did go through question 2 and I think question 4, because there were some interesting things in those. So I don't know that anybody's actually going to face this situation that's up in question 2A. So must a school provide special education and related services to a child with a disability who's absent for an extended period of time because the child themselves is infected, but the school is remaining open? So I don't think any of us are facing that situation because none of our schools are remaining open. But I do think some of what they say in here could still be useful if we're looking at maybe the schools aren't remaining open, but they're providing services. So one thing I've heard a few people say is, well, maybe now everybody just has a different placement of home instruction, because not only is it the least restrictive environment right now, it is because it's the only environment, right? So what if they were to say we're just classifying all of these special education students as being on home instruction because the school is closed for more than 10 days and we're providing services in a home instruction type setting to our general population students. If that is the case, the instruction they give here, and it does align with case law, is that the IEP meeting, now you have an IEP meeting to discuss, should we actually change placements? And if we do we have to alter the contents of the IEP? Right? So we may not have to have the meeting to discuss, is the change necessary? Because it is. Everybody has to be at home. So then the remaining question is, do we have to change the content of the IEP based on this new placement of home instruction? So Shannon and Nikki, do you see where I'm kind of going with this? And I'm kind of taking it out of context from the way they phrase the question, but just throwing it in. What if that becomes the argument of, well, everybody's just on home instruction? What do you think? Do you think I'm reading too much into that?
No, I don't think you are. I think we can make a good argument based on that. But as a practical matter, I can't get anybody to talk to me, let alone come together for an IEP meeting to have a meaningful discussion. So
I agree. And I think the schools will probably have a difficult time having IEP meetings just because of the amount of meetings they would have to have an IEP meeting, even for half of the students. Even if we were to say only half of the parents are even going to want to bother with it, that's still a lot of IEP meetings. But if they were, then it would be an amendment stating specifically the amount of time. And then they even list down here, this bottom blue section, that it could even, homebound services could be delivered online, virtual instruction, telephone calls, and other curriculum-based instructional activities to the extent available. And I do know from a lot of case law that I've read, when we're going to home instruction, it's never a minute-to-minute transfer of the amount of services they were receiving at school to what they're now going to get at home, right? It's a fraction of that.
It's
so
an arbitrary fraction.
Very small, yes.
Arbitrary.
So usually you get somebody from the school district for what, an hour or two each week that comes in, and I don't even know if we would get that much right now, just because of the amount of students that would need it anyway. But I just thought it was something to at least bring up to discuss. Do you guys have any other thoughts on that?
I do not.
Okay. So I know Jenny just said their school informed them that all IEP meetings will be canceled till after school's back in session. Jenny, do you mind telling us what school district you're in? Oh, they're at Inspire. Okay. So here's, oh, this is the bottom half of A2. It does say, this is that same question. I just didn't want to fit it all on one screen and make the type too small. So if we go to the very last paragraph of that, it does talk about making up for skills that may have been lost. So that was something else that I thought, okay, maybe we do have some hope even in that way if they were to classify it as home instruction. But in order to do that, I truly do think they would have to at least have, even if it weren't an actual IEP meeting, but just send proposed amendments out to parents for us to choose whether or not to sign, they would at least have to do that, I think, to call it home instruction, change of placement.
And just reading that really literally, like the kid also has to get COVID-19 in order to get to make up skills that have lost, right?
Yeah. No, and that's what I meant by I'm definitely taking what I'm talking about out of context of the exact question.
Yeah.
I took their guidance on that they answered in light of that question to just say, what if they were to say, well, we just put them all on home instruction during this closure time?
Yeah, I mean, and we are all functionally operating as though we have COVID-19 right now. So, I mean, I think on a practical basis, you could argue that like the kid lost the skills because he had, he or she had
or he was at least being treated like he was a carrier or something. Yeah.
I mean, we all are right now, so.
Yep, good point. And I think the only other one that I highlighted anything for was A4, which talks about, and again, I think I'm taking what I was going to discuss slightly out of context from the exact question here too. If a child with a disability at high risk of severe medical complications is excluded from school during the outbreak, but the school remains open. So again, we're not talking like this is an exact situation because none of our schools are remaining open. But if I'm just taking it kind of one step further. If our general population students are getting something, but now our severe medical complicated child isn't, is their exclusion considered a change in placement? And all they really talk about here, they get down to long-term exclusions because we know we're going to go more than 10 days. So this will be a long-term thing. The school district must consider the placement decisions under the procedural protections of IDEA. So all of that least restrictive still has to apply regarding the continuum of alternative placements. But I don't know how meaningful that is when the only placement possible is home anyway. So, but I just thought it was interesting that they still threw in the whole, we have to think about this continuum of placement options statement in there. That is all that I put together for this. Shannon and Nikki, do you have anything else before I unmute and open it for questions?
I would just add that I was very encouraged today. Jodie, I shared with you the commentary published by COPA today. For those of you that may or may not know, COPA is a gigantic national organization, COPA, Council of Parent Advocates and Attorneys, and they are solely 100% on parent side, and they are consistently taking on the school districts and up at the Supreme Court level in terms of weighing in on certain legal issues. They're a very strong organization. And they came out today with their position that says, no, the Secretary of Education does not have the right to waive FAPE under IDEA. So the Secretary of Education is saying, okay, so we're going to scale back some of the requirements of the states and school districts in terms of providing education to the students. However, COPA's position is that the Secretary of Education does not have the right to waive FAPE. And so it's COPA's position that there can be no compromise right now on these IEPs that we have out there in place, and that these districts are absolutely on the hook and obligated to continue providing all supports and services under the IEP. And so they are loudly and not quite aggressively yet, but disagreeing with the Department of Education's position that we're going over here right now. So I'm sitting back and eagerly waiting for maybe some sort of a well-developed legal brief to come out of COPA that supports that position with some legal authority, because I think that could make a big difference in what we're facing right now.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I'm trying to find here. Okay, I think I've got it here.
Stay tuned.
I finally found it. I think. Are you guys seeing this new screen now of
No.
the COPA? No? Let me try again. Is that working yet?
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing the COPA screen now?
Yeah.
You are? Okay. So this is the website. I think. Okay. Yeah, so here's the website and here's their statement. So if you were to Google, all I did, you can see my Google, you can probably see that up here, right? I did COPA statement COVID. I Googled that and this came right up. So you can read that if you'd like to. I agree. It is, if you're not familiar with COPA, it is the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates. So the people who wrote this statement are probably all special education attorneys who advocate for individuals and families of individuals with disabilities. And if not all, probably most of them who put this together. And yeah, they are taking the stance of, like Nikki said, there's no power to waive FAPE. So how could school districts just say we're not going to provide it right now? And it is hopeful in our world right now where there seems to be very little hope. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Nikki.
Sure. So I actually just put a little snippet on the group thread there for everyone. What I think is so interesting is that COPA says that there's no basis for not holding IEPs at this time, because we can do that, virtually from really anywhere. This world can be completely virtual. And what they say is that the IEP team has to come together to determine if, it's a two-pronged test. Is the child available for instruction? And if so, can the child benefit from homebound services? So they're saying that's a minimum requirement that the districts need to meet.
And that makes a lot of sense, especially in light of we as parents might be able to step in and help that home instruction be more meaningful if we just had the supplies and maybe the consults that we need with the school staff. Although that's a lot of work for us, but we can do it. I did cut and paste the link into the chat. If anybody wants that, you should be able to copy that from the chat to this COPA statement. All right, I will. I'm going to unmute everybody and just see how it goes. If there's too much talking or too much background noise, I will mute all and we'll chat questions. But does anybody have a question? And keep in mind before you ask, we can't give out legal advice, so we can't speak to specific situations, at least not in this type of a setting. But we can try and phrase the answers at least to generalities. So did anybody have a question? And if you do, please say your name before you ask. All right, so we're good then? All right, okay, I'm gonna assume that we were so great, we answered every single one of your many, many questions. No, I'm just kidding. It's hard sometimes to ask in a situation like this even.
Yes, someone's talking, Jody.
Oh yes, please, go ahead.
Here, 1 second.
Did somebody have a question? Okay. All right. Well, I thank all of you for joining us. I know, oh, here was a question from Chelsea. What do you think will happen if this goes longer than April? I think, first of all, we're all going to have to fight to keep our sanity, for one. But I don't know. That's an excellent question. What do you think, Nikki and Shannon?
As to Barbara's question about requesting a meeting before the school closure.
To Chelsea's. Chelsea says, what do you think will happen if this goes longer than April?
I think they'll have to do IEPs by some kind of other means, you know, even the districts are saying not doing it right now, because it just, that many can't pile up. I mean, it would be a nightmare, but there is, I have heard a lot of predictions that we're not going back to school this school year. And that is a bummer. I would say hang in there. What I was going to say before my son called me to help him is that ABA services, if you can get, those are essential services, so those are still available to people who want them. If you, I understand that not everybody on an IEP is eligible for ABA, but if you, this might be a good time to start trying to work on that eligibility. So you can get these services, you know, some relief, you know, like my son does 2 hours a day right now. And I think, you know, he wouldn't start crazy if he didn't. So just this may be the time, if you've been pushing to get ABA services, the time to really do it. And I think insurance companies are going to be a little more lenient with those designations as well. So.
Hi, can you guys hear me? This is Yolanda from the State Council on Developmental Disabilities.
Hi, Yolanda.
Hi, how are you guys? It's nice being part of this webinar. Thank you so much for putting it together.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to bring up is I'm trying to put together a committee to address the issue of the schoolwork that needs to be provided to the special ed kids, and I'm getting ready to email a few of the local school districts. If you'd like, if you guys can, gather questions that you guys would like my agency to ask the school districts. I'd like to eventually have some type of a teleconference with a few of the school district directors. I have a pretty good relationship with Madera Unified Director Special Ed right now, and I know I can at least get her to talk to me about what it is that they're going to do with providing information and providing work to the students.
Great. And Yolanda, I don't know, did you tell everybody the department you work in?
No. I work for the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. I'm the regional manager there.
And you're the manager of our local office here in Fresno, yes. Right? Sequoia.
Yeah, I'm located in the Fresno office. It's the Sequoia office, and we cover 7 counties. We are an independent state agency, and I don't know if you guys got the flyer on the law enforcement and autism training. My agency is the one that's putting that together. Yeah, so
thank you for doing that.
Yeah, that's.
Could you in the chat maybe list your email, and maybe people can send you emails with the questions? That way you've got them to take to the districts.
Yeah,
that's what you're wanting, right? Questions that we as parents have for the school districts.
Exactly. Yeah. So let me go. I don't really know how to use this. So I gotta
tell me your email. I'll just type it out as you're telling me.
Yeah, I'm doing it. I'm sending it to you. Okay, I need to figure out how to use this because we're actually going to have to be doing a lot of these in the next few weeks.
Better at this. Okay, so she sent it to me privately, so I'm going to copy it and paste it to the group. Okay, yes, so please send questions that you have, specific questions for the school district. Send them to Yolanda. That will be a great vehicle for us to get our voices heard, and to have the school districts know what we as special education parents are wondering, because I think Nikki addressed this. Our gen ed students are getting packets, and not all of them, but some of them, but very few of us have heard anything about our kids with disabilities. what's going to happen with them. So let's see, I muted everybody because there was a lot of background noise. So let me unmute Nikki. Sorry. It's just easier to mute everyone and then unmute our. If you do want to chime in with a question, I was told this earlier, you can press the space bar down. That way we don't get everybody's background noise. So if you have a question that we haven't addressed yet, hold your space bar down and chime in. While you're waiting to think about that, I know Barbara had posted a question. How long should I wait for an email reply about the meeting I requested? I don't want to hold off for a month and the situation be forgotten. Excellent question. Nikki, what do you think about that?
I was just typing her an answer. Barbara, as an attorney, I would follow up every couple of days. But then again, I'm not the parent that has to, preserve. If you have a good working relationship with your school, you're going to return to that school. But then again, these are unique times, and there's not any time to wait. So every couple of days, I'd follow up, especially since someone made a good point that these teachers have plenty of time right now. I mean, these administrators, maybe not the administrators, but yeah, don't wait too long. There's nothing that says you have to.
And don't be shy about calling and leaving messages and stuff like that, because the squeaky wheel gets the cheese or whatever.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing with the packet, so I just got a packet from my son today, and it was more interesting than I thought it would be. So what they have is a QR code for like a video that they made for the kids every day of the packet, which is kind of cute. I haven't watched the videos yet, but so there's going to be some interaction either with the principal or the, like maybe the morning message, because they usually do a morning message, but something to add that continuity. But they do have, the capability to kind of marry, responding to Stephanie's question. They do have the ability to use multimedia even through paper in these packets. They also sent him a box of crayons, which was nice. But, if I could get the level of books he's reading and, have some assignments there, that would be great too. But this is the first week. So I feel like they kind of, they did 2 weeks worth of welcome videos. That's a pretty cool thing. And maybe they'll get better at it as we get deeper into this shutdown.
Yeah. And I noticed Lisa had an interesting question. Fresno County Office of Education doesn't have gen ed students. Are they still responsible for providing services through FAPE? So there was a question, if I can find, I have all these screens up for sharing. There was a question in that Q&A from the Department of Education.
About public schools that are specifically for special ed students?
Yeah, I'm thinking that one might be the best one to pair with that question.
Yeah, that's
It's A3.
Yeah.
Okay, so you should be seeing the document now, the actual Q&A from Department of Education. You said it was A3?
Yeah.
Okay, What services must an LEA provide if a public school for children with disabilities is selectively closed due to the COVID outbreak? All right, Nikki, do you, or either of you, Shannon, do you have something to say about that?
It looks to me like the LEA is obligated to make a determination at the very least, meaning
And it looks almost individual, right? Each dismissed child.
Right, but it looks like that obligation is affirmative in there, whereas, the schools that provide general ed and special ed as well, if they choose not to provide educational opportunities / services, they don't have to consider the special ed, but it looks to me like there's an affirmative obligation to make a case-by-case determination.
Well,
I agree.
I agree with that. And then they also have the out, which is the department understands there may be exceptional circumstances that could affect how a particular service is provided, which, kind of crushes the whole thing.
Yeah, but think about that. It actually says
entitled to an individual evaluation.
Yeah, but I think it's not just child to child, but even from that child, each of their services, a particular service. So maybe they can't benefit from speech virtually online, but maybe they could benefit from other things online, right? Maybe there's another, maybe for some reason they love math and numbers on the computer they're okay with. They'll pay attention to that. Or maybe they've got some fun game that they play that does math with them. So even from child to child, I don't think they can just make a blanket statement of they won't be able to benefit from online services. We even have to break that down by particular service.
Yeah, it sounds to me like they have to assess that by each child, which is good.
Yeah.
Because if a child doesn't have access to a computer, then they're going to need something different, or they're going to need a computer.
But at least under this answer, or at least this interpretation, they have to come together and at least have that conversation, whereas the other school districts that are not specifically for special ed students don't have that obligation.
I would say at the very least, they should be sending emails out. They should be sending amendment proposals, IEP amendment proposals, that we as parents can say, no, I won't sign that without some sort of a meeting, even if it's a telephonic meeting, or if we agree with everything in the amendment, we can choose to sign it and say, yes, let's move forward with that. Because I do think they will have so many IEP meetings they have to hold that they can't have full-blown 5-hour IEP meetings for every student, not right now. I think. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I would agree with you on that.
Because we do have to be reasonable in light of the current situation.
Yeah, so somebody was just asking about juvenile hall, because those students are not necessarily IEP or 504, but they're in educational, getting educational services. And obviously they won't have iPads and computers and phones and things. I mean, I don't know, they may have a computer lab, but delivering virtual instruction would be really difficult too.
Yeah. That's a good, it's an argument for the district to make that we're not obligated under A1 to provide services because we have these, look, we have this general population student over here. And I say that tongue in cheek because that's ridiculous, but Jodie, I want to make sure we pop back up to Farah's question.
I was just looking at that one about the 2 IEEs.
Yeah, a very interesting question with respect to a due process settlement agreement. So it seems like, do you want to unmute her maybe?
Yeah, can you hold down your spacebar button? Does that work, Farah? Okay, you're unmuted too.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. So my due process settlement agreement stated I was able to obtain 4 IEs. Now, 2 of those have been completed, excuse me, 1 of those have been completed, sorry, speech. OT, PT, and psycho ed have not. They do need to go in and see him in the classroom. So obviously he's not in the classroom, so that's not going to be accessible for them to do that. So the timeline was June. They said I had until June to complete these IEEs. So what do I do in this scenario?
Well, I think one of the benefits of the IEE is getting that outside provider to see your student in the classroom, right? I mean, in their office, you may still be able to do that because healthcare services can continue. They may be able to come to your home and provide some of the assessment in that way. But that component of the actual viewing them in the classroom is usually one of the most important parts of the IEE. So I would think that just in that vein, calling the school district and saying, hey, we can't complete all parts of this until that setting is back in place, would be reason enough for them to maybe redraft or make an amendment to the settlement agreement. What do you think, Nikki?
Farah, what's your concern? Are you concerned you're going to lose that entitlement? That if you don't,
yes,
and
yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That the district isn't going to pay for that or fund it?
Yes, I'm thinking they've been really pushy on the timeline, and with that being said, they have just said, we have till June. We have till June. And so, like I said, this coming next week, he was, Goodfellow was supposed to see him in the classroom next week, but obviously that ain't going to happen. So, with the person, looking forward, I'm thinking, well, what are we going to do, right? Are they going to hold me to that to June? And if so, how do I, approach them in regards to extending maybe that timeline? Is it something that would have to be done through an actual legal process, like the due process sort of complaint, or could we make an agreement together, us in writing, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think that certainly parties can agree to anything that they want, right? Two parties, you only go to a due process hearing or to court if you can't reach an agreement. So whatever you and the district agree to, you can certainly memorialize that in writing and it's binding. I would be curious as to why they're being so pushy on this June thing. I'm guessing that aggressiveness was prior to the closures. I think they have much bigger fish to fry now. I don't know the district, but I would sure think
Tulare City.
Tulare City?
Yeah.
Okay. But if you look at this guidance from the Department of Education, there's so much about reasonable to the extent possible, and so many, we're all in this together, and so let's be, reasonable here. I sure think that you'd be able to use that argument on them. If we're not holding, if they're able to kind of, be let off the hook to some degree, I would sure think you would be as well. I can't imagine in the spirit of that settlement that wouldn't be upheld if they continue to take a hard line on that.
No, because they've created by shutting down the school, they've created the impossibility that you cannot now meet your condition.
Yeah.
Right. So, that kind of voids the condition if they create a situation where it's impossible for you to meet that condition. But I think, if you have an attorney you've been working with, have them shoot a quick letter over to district council and say, look, we need an extension because it's, this is closed. Or, if you have whoever you have the relationship with, if you feel comfortable sending them an email saying, look, we can't meet this deadline now, can we extend it? Can we meet and reset the deadline once we know when school's going back in? Right? Because if you reset the deadline for August 1st, you're going to have the same problem on August 1st that you have today, probably, right?
Right.
Which kind of begs the question, though, too, of maybe it's not an IEE, maybe it's just an assessment the school was performing, right? They've got 60 days to finish that assessment and hold an IEP meeting. This question was not addressed at all in the Q&A that Department of Ed released. They did not talk about these deadlines at all.
No.
So we're left to just wonder. But I would think they would use the exact same argument with their assessment of we can't truly perform the assessment if the child's not in a classroom setting, because that's one of the paramount parts of the assessment is how are they performing in the classroom. And I think they are going to use that argument to extend their own assessment deadlines that they wouldn't, I'm assuming, then if they use that, they wouldn't be able to go, but it only applies to us and not to you.
Well, right. They're extending out all these IEP deadlines. There's no way they're not going to, that parents aren't going to get some latitude as well.
Yeah.
It
never hurts to get it in writing, right?
Yeah. I'll have a conversation with them and ask them to extend it. If they choose not to, then I can always look forward to another conversation with somebody else.
And Andrea asked, will lost minutes be made up once school resumes? Andrea, are you still there? You are there. I can see you. Do you want to explain, what did you mean by that? I just unmuted you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My question was, during the closure, I know that we had talked about the ability to, that once if we do an amendment to IEPs, that the actual minutes might not transfer specifically to homebound instruction. So my question is, if there is an IEP and no amendment is made, do those minutes have to be made up once school does resume back into normal, whatever the normal classroom structure is? Because typically before, if the minutes were not given to students, they would have to be provided to the student after the fact, correct? If it was found that they were not in compliance?
Well, that makes me think of here, and I think it was in question 1A, that very first question, where it talks about, I can't remember exactly where, but it did mention that to the greatest extent possible, that they be provided the special education and related services identified in their IEP.
Okay.
So they've said to the greatest extent possible, recognizing that it may take us a while to get everything up and running. So they may not get everything all at once as soon as the school reopens, right? It may take a while. That's my thought. Nikki and Shannon, what do you think?
Well, I think like as a practical matter, if the kids are out of school for 4 months, 5 months, it just wouldn't be possible in any reasonable amount of time to actually make up the minutes that they've lost. But in order to, you know, maximize the services that you're getting, make sure that you're talking about the minutes that were lost, and, you know, like ask for as many of those back as you can get.
Okay, yeah, and I think that for me, that was more directed towards not necessarily the instructional minutes as much as it was for additional services like OT, PT, things like that the student needed during that time that the school district might not be able to provide now, but once they resume with those minutes kind of.
Right, but I think you should press on that, because, you know, more OT that's always better, right? If you're supposed to be getting a half an hour a week and you can get them to increase it to an hour and a half a week to make up these past minutes, you know, it's a good argument, because there is, you know, to the greatest extent possible, if, you know, if they would have to increase OT to 8 hours a day, or, you know, just the numbers might become unreasonable if we're out for a really extended period of time. But I think you should definitely use that to get your kid more of the services that you want.
And I think that's an excellent question to email Yolanda too, to ask the school districts, like, what will be done about all those lost minutes? How do you plan to address trying to make some, if or all of them up? I don't think I'm with Shannon. I don't think they'll be able to make all of them up. But then again, our students only get about 20 to 30 minutes a week of speech, so maybe it won't be that hard.
You know, in talking about compensatory education, it's never one-to-one ever. And nobody knows what that is. Like it's not prescribed anywhere in case law or statute anywhere. It's always just, you start with the top, and
it's kind of whatever the judge feels like, it seems sometimes.
Right. But aim high. Aim high. And that's where that data on that regression is going to really come in handy. Whatever you can record and show them, they can't say no to that in the face of good data like that. So,
Okay, thank you.
I think, did we get everybody's question that they typed in? If we didn't answer your question and you have one, please retype it, because I've kind of lost track in the chat. We'll hold on a few minutes there. I'm going to re-pull up, if I can find it. I have so many screens going on. It's really not even funny right now. I was going to try and re-pull up our slides we talked about so you could see the questions for the teachers again, but I'm not sure where it went. I don't see any additional questions, and I don't see my slides anywhere. I don't know where they went. I will email them out though. Like I said, I believe everybody had to sign in with an email address, correct? Before you could get in? Yep. I turned on a function where you had to register, which meant I got everybody's email address. So as long as I have an email address, I will be sending it out to you. So if it's not one you check very often, check it if you'd like that. And all of those suggested questions and things will be in the slides. It will be the exact slides that I showed tonight. And I know somebody asked if they could get email addresses. Shannon and Nikki, if you have an email address that you'd like to share, you could go ahead and put that in the in the chat. I'll put mine as well. I can't promise right now that any of us will be able to get back to you with everything, but we will definitely try. So there's our email addresses with further questions, and I thank everybody for joining us tonight, and good luck. Stay healthy, wash your hands, and keep your sanity.
Thank you, Jodie.
Thank you. Good night.